On July 31, 1964, the U.S. Navy's first nuclear task force commenced Operation Sea Orbit. Designated Task Force 1, the group included the Navy's first 3 nuclear-powered surface ships. Guided missile cruiser Long Beach and aircraft carrier Enterprise had joined the fleet in 1961. Frigate Bainbridge was commissioned in 1962. Their mission was to complete an historic globe-circling voyage of more than 30,000 miles in 65 days without a logistics lifeline. This episode of Battlestars tracks Task Force 1 around the world as it demonstrated the practical advantages and unique capabilities of nuclear-powered warships, as well as American technological prowess, to friends and foes alike. On board Enterprise, Rear Admiral Bernard "Smoke" Streen had command of Task Force 1. 20 years earlier, in June 1944, he had earned a Navy Cross for planting a bomb onto the flight deck of a Japanese carrier. In a long career in naval aviation, Streen believed he had mastered the problems of mobility and logistics that involved modern carriers. But Enterprise's unique capabilities even surprised him. She was especially fast, accelerated quickly, and had a range measured in years, not nautical miles. This carrier, which was the largest warship in the world, could maneuver into and out of trouble faster than any other.
See, man, we like to feel that we can get out of trouble quicker than we got into it.
It could accommodate more aircraft than any other carrier, but Streen knew that such a weapon still could not reach its fullest potential while operating with warships that burned black oil and depended on tankers to remain at sea. In terms of speed, strike capability, and sustainability, Task Force 1 was about to set the bar much higher. On board Enterprise, passing through the Straits of Gibraltar and into the Atlantic, Captain Frederick Michaelis wasn't kidding when he announced to all hands that they would be taking the long way home to Norfolk. The plan called for Task Force 1 to cruise down West Africa's coast, round the Cape of Good Hope, cross the Indian and Pacific Oceans, round Cape Horn at the tip of South America, steam north along South America's Atlantic coast, and pass through the Caribbean for home. Officials from 15 different countries visited the task force during the 65-day operation. Typically, planes from the Big E's Carrier Air Wing 6 would fly inland to retrieve officials for an inspection of Task Force 1 and put on a demonstration of carrier air power. Operation Sea Orbit was hardly an hour old when the underway visits began, with officials flown from Rabat, Morocco, to observe the first firepower demonstration. During the first week of August, while cruising south along the African coast, the ships welcomed visits from dignitaries representing Senegal, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Ivory Coast. On August 6th, when Enterprise crossed the equator for the first time, Neptunus Rex held court in all 3 ships. Although the ceremonies were interrupted by a combat air patrol launch to intercept a suspicious radar contact, the aviators returned in time for their initiation. Altogether, more than 4,300 men were elevated in status from polywog to shellback. On August 10th, the task force rendezvoused off the Cape of Good Hope with elements of the South African Navy. Honors were exchanged and an air show performed for the crews of the host's ships, Steaming and Company. 5 days later, on August 15th, the task force hosted dignitaries from Kenya. Highly popular port calls, where at least one of the 3 ships dropped anchor for 2 to 3 days, started at Karachi, Pakistan, on August 20th. That morning, a UH-2A Sea Sprite helicopter crashed, but helicopters from Enterprise and Long Beach quickly recovered the aircrew. Despite rough weather, eventually all 3 ships called at Karachi. The visit ended on August 22nd, when Enterprise launched 33 jets for an aerial demonstration over the city. On the 28th of August, while south of Indonesia, the task force conducted an air defense exercise with HMS Victorious and hosted several Royal Navy officers on board the Big E for an air fire power demonstration. Australia provided the cruise's most memorable moments. On the morning of August 31st, Official visits on board the Enterprise began in the morning and lasted for the better part of a week. The Air Wing performed a spectacular beach flyover and air power display at Fremantle and nearby Perth for large and enthusiastic crowds. While Bainbridge called at Fremantle and Long Beach visited Melbourne, the Big E steamed nearby, performing multiple air shows and flybys. On September 4th off Sydney, Air Wing 6 arguably put on its best show to date. Later that day, the Big E entered Sydney to a tumultuous welcome, with an estimated crowd of 100,000 people jamming the Fleet Landing and cliffs overlooking the harbour. In a diplomatic tour de force, more than 9,300 people, including the Prime Minister of Australia, Sir Robert Menzies, and Lady Menzies, came on board in 3 days. To the pleasant surprise of the local superintendent of police, some 8,200 Liberty calls ashore by the U.S. servicemen came off without incident. The most unusual arrival on board Enterprise was an 18-month-old kangaroo named Matilda. Through the efforts of an enlisted sailor, she had been obtained as a gift for the Norfolk Zoo from Sydney's Taronga Zoological Park. Though she often became seasick, she arrived at her new home in fine fettle. Task Force 1 stopped in Wellington, New Zealand on September 8 and 9th. Although bad weather had dogged the ships after leaving Australia, then descended on Wellington with gale-force winds, official visits continued, and New Zealanders hosted men from Bainbridge and Long Beach ashore. Prime Minister Keith J. Holyoake visited Enterprise. Again, the hospitality shown to the task force was overwhelming and a boon for morale. Always the center of attention, Enterprise scored another public relations triumph when officers discovered that 4 men among her crew of thousands had relatives who circled the globe in Teddy Roosevelt's Great White Fleet of 1907 to 1909. Task Force 1 crossed the international dateline on September 10th, and despite heavy weather that produced a 41-degree roll in Long Beach, reached the snow-capped heights of Cape Horn on the 17th. Bad weather chased the task force all the way to the River Plate estuary. Air Wing 6 put on 2 air power demonstrations for dignitaries from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Montevideo, Uruguay, on September 21st. 2 days later, Task Force 1 called at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, repeating the air shows across 3 days. An A-5A Vigilante crashed 17 miles from the carrier, but again the aircrew were quickly rescued. Task Force 1 steamed north through the Caribbean on the following day, on the cruise's last leg. After a brief stop at Recife, Brazil, Task Force 1 was on the last leg of its journey. While steaming north through the Caribbean, Enterprise hosted a group of U.S. government officials from Puerto Rico who observed the group's last firepower demonstration. On October 2nd, Air Wing 6 launched all its aircraft for home. On the following day, Enterprise arrived to the cheers of thousands from the dock at Norfolk. Operation Sea Orbit ended officially just after 1500 hours on Saturday, October 3rd, when Enterprise and Long Beach reached Norfolk and Bainbridge had put into Charleston. For Admiral Streen, Operation Sea Orbit demonstrated that the nuclear task force's speed, mobility, reliability, and sustainability were unsurpassed. No ship in history had ever covered 30,500 miles in 65 days, and Task Force 1 covered its course in only 57 steaming days, setting several speed records. No group of conventionally powered ships could have attempted such a feat. Throughout this period, the ships maintained an unconventional average speed of 25 knots while operating in all types of weather and sea states. The task force operated in the Indian Ocean during monsoon season, rounded Cape Horn during the Southern Hemisphere's rough winter, crossed the equator 4 times and the international dateline once, and in total experienced 1 Thursday twice, 2 winters, 2 summers, 1 autumn, and 1 spring. As a roving ambassador, Task Force 1 also entertained nearly 20,000 visitors while in port and 425 guests while underway. Thousands of people, most of whom never saw tactical air power at work, marveled at its aircraft. Perhaps with one eye on the Tonkin Gulf incident that had occurred while Task Force 1 was still off West Africa, Streen said that at any time the group could have been diverted to any location in the world without hesitation or concern for logistics. In Washington, D.C., the nuclear prophets, who envisioned an all-nuclear Navy by the late 70s, saw Operation Sea Orbit as an unqualified vindication of their position. Not everyone agreed. Long Beach's price tag was higher than the cost of building a new oil-burning carrier. Bainbridge had cost twice as much to construct as a conventionally powered guided missile destroyer. Debates over cost and the relative merits of nuclear power, about the proper roles for modern surface combatants, as well as the escalating conflict in Southeast Asia, soon dulled the positive achievements of Operation Sea Orbit. Caught in the doldrums, the aging fleet still awaited its renaissance.